in a few minutes. I'll send you a link in the chat line in a few minutes, but I put everything into all the videos into a playlist, and I'll give people a link to the playlist for this, for all of the things. Go, Mert or Eric. Eric, did you want to start to?
Sure. Just today we're happy to have Mert here to give us some summary of the asset management initiative within WISE and discuss any possible overlap, maybe some areas where we could collaborate with the asset management team. So with that, I'll hand it over to Mert, and thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. I'm, excited to see you all. Thank you for inviting me. And it's kind of weird that, I always want to work more with Mia, but like this is the avenue we end up meeting through. Like it's so weird. But yeah, good to see you all. Nice to meet you all if I haven't had a chance to meet. My name is Mert. I'm the engineering supervisor for the asset management branch for Portland Water Bureau. With my co-lead Chris Wu from Metro Vancouver, we were facilitating a bunch of meetings, web sessions just such as this, to further the previous work done on the asset management plan development WISE team. And initially we started with the business workflow that was developed by like a bunch of the utilities that got together on, basically how to develop an asset management plan, what kind of, obviously, inputs, outputs, whatnots. So we started with that. And we basically discussed, okay, out of this relatively complex process, not everything was explained in, like the level 2 or level 3, if you will, the next level of detail as far as like a business process workflow is concerned. And we wanted to entertain some alternatives for us to be able to dig deeper in and investigate further and develop workflows around. So there were basically, three main items we considered. One of them was sort of level of service, line of sight discussion, starting from strategic priorities of an organization down to, sort of the day-to-day activities that the staff do and the relationship between those. Another alternative we considered was during the risk assessment part of an asset management plan development, we considered, what if we looked into a process or a sort of a standardized guideline around monetizing the consequence of failure impacts instead of using a score. And we also considered, okay, since one of the main outputs of an asset management plan is the development of these bunch of strategies you basically come up with to respond to identified needs, and then there is a cost associated with that. What if we looked at that cost, more from a, life cycle of the asset, whole of life cycle asset perspective, and not just necessarily focusing on, asset interventions around rehabilitations and renewals. I don't think maybe it is a shock to some of you, maybe it's not, but in the industry and not just necessarily, at the Portland Water Bureau either, the main focus of asset management plans are around sending out these, sometimes they are, operational budgets, of course, but sending out these projects. And generally, most of them end up as a capital budget item. While capital budget items have a, at the end of the day, most likely a lower user rate impact compared with the annual operating budgets, because they can leverage amortization and longer payback periods. Yeah, so like the operational side has this bigger impact that often gets perhaps, not getting enough attention that it deserves. So lifecycle costing ultimately was voted the highest item for us to dig deeper in that team. So today, with that said, with that little bit of background, I'm going to try to sort of take you through the journey we went through and summarize it for you all on how we went about doing that and what we ended up creating. Our documents are not final yet. We had a meeting yesterday where we reach a stage where I think in the next in 2 weeks' time we'll be able to finalize our revised workflow. But we are close to that stage, so I think it's worth sharing with you all. So I am going to start sharing my screen. Okay, so real quick, and don't worry about, not being able to read this necessarily. Some of you may have seen it. We are not going to go over this in detail, but what this is that this is the output of the BPMN workflow from a bunch of utilities that work together back in the early phases of the project. And this is the process, that basically the aims, you aim/wise at the time, put forward for developing an asset management plan, the generic process. Recommendation that there is a steering committee, there's a specific asset management group, that actually works closely with the steering committee and facilitates the development of asset management plans for the most part. And then there's a specific asset management team that actually does the operational work of developing an asset management plan. We don't really have the time, and I'm happy to provide these documents. Obviously, Cello knows where they are; he can send it as well. But it basically takes us through this process of all the way down to these individual steps, all the way down to finalizing an asset management plan document. So you'll notice that the risk stuff gets taken care of here. And then developing management strategies and then costing of those management strategies. Some of them are capital, right? Some of them are day-to-day operational lifecycle, as a whole of lifecycle considerations get taken care of in this little part of the workflow. So we primarily focused on this little part of the workflow regarding the lifecycle costs. Okay, so let's move on. So the very first thing we did was just sit down and develop a few iterations of what our scope of work, if you will, like our internal scope of work approach will be when it comes to drafting an asset lifecycle cost set of calculations. Think of this as sort of like a starting document for an internal to an asset management team, like an SOP, if you will, almost of our asset management team to develop lifecycle costs. So we worked on this together as a team for a little while, covered objective approach, and then a bunch of proposed tasks to do. So, dividing the assets around categories, developing standard decay curves if they are not available out of the failure data, accounting for hazardous environments and how that may actually have a different impact on lifecycle costs. And then in the absence of actual data, developing some baseline percentages around asset categories / asset type combinations to utilize on a per year basis to the assets for operations and maintenance cost activities. Going into a little bit more detail on how the potential changes in cost over time for preventive, predictive, and corrective maintenance activities may look like, just a descriptive theory, utilizing some sort of risk / cost criteria for predictive maintenance selection. Obviously, we are not going to go listen to every little pump sort of thing. And then we also entertained links to other WISE initiatives. Energy, business case, and CIP development are being all good links to all this. So this was sort of our guideline document, if you will. Then we wanted to get a little more tactical. Let's see what this entails. So for that, that our next step was to go ahead and just put it to the test. Now, normally, if you have a, well-functioning computerized maintenance management system, or even some sort of an asset management decision-making system with the data entered, that will do most of the work for you. We don't have those. We don't have like a CMMS right now that can do flow of lifecycle cost. It has a lot of data on maintenance. There's not much on operational, and sometimes there are some data quality issues, which I'm sure is not a shock to anybody. So we basically wanted to just say, okay, let's just create what the logic for this may look like for a given asset.
That's fine.
So that's what we did by just putting together a, pretty quick lifecycle cost tool that can be implemented on a per asset basis. So this is what it looks like. So for a given asset, there are past years, current year, future years, changing condition over time, which you can actually go measure in the field, either, visually or using some tools, or, if at the absence of all that, maybe some sort of an age-based assessment. But there is some condition change over time and a corresponding percent life consumed number. And then these are just calculations, but then the life cycle cost parameters, if you will, the individual inputs into a life cycle cost were considered. So this is what these are some of the things that we looked at, acquisition, rehab, replacement, disposal, operational costs. Just for an example, we only used power here, and then different maintenance activities. So this was just for us to be able to create the background, to be able to develop the revised more detailed workflow. Because if you just go back here real quick, you'll notice that developing management strategies and developing the cost of these management strategies are actually hiding, sub processes under them with that little plus sign. So we wanted to develop, at least one of those around costing, lifecycle cost, how to go about doing that there. So this is part of it. Now, maybe I don't need to go into too much detail, but there's a few other things we considered that actually serve as input into the lifecycle tool. So we developed these together. Change in condition over time through different decay profiles. Remember, we talk about different asset categories like civil versus electrical versus mechanical. So each of those may land on one of these. If you don't have your own data to actually generate them for you, we can choose one of these to move from. And then we did the same for maintenance costs. I still am not in love with these curves. I want to actually use something more of a bathtub curve in real life. But just to illustrate a point, we also did a similar analysis on as the asset condition changes. Like a different maintenance curves. So preventive may be pretty flat over assets lifetime or flattish, but perhaps corrective maintenance may be a little bit more intensive as the asset ages. So we also wanted the model to include opportunities for being able to account for those variations as the asset ages. So we use these sorts of maintenance cost change versus condition over an asset's life cycle. All right, so I'm going to take a quick break. I know I'm also rushing just to make sure we give you enough time for whatever else you need to discuss. Any questions so far before I go back to the revised workflow? Okay, thank you. No, hearing none. All right. So these then served as input on how to go about developing that, if you were to click on that little plus for, developing the cost for different management strategies, predictive, preventive, whatever strategies they may be, what does that look like? So this is the part that is still in development, which is kind of interesting, right? It's just one little box in the big workflow, but you click on it and then, you end up with, so many other boxes on that little thing. So let's zoom in. So I'm not going to necessarily spend too much time on this. We'll go one by one. It will take a while, but here, what we're trying to do then is develop that workflow for a team to follow when it comes to developing those asset lifecycle costs. So we go around in this first section, we look at whether or not failure data exists for us to use for curve development. If yes, yes. If no, go around decay curves and then development of the standard maintenance cost curves. From there, decide on asset rehabilitation. Asset rehabilitation potentials, and I see a question that came in, but it went away. Hold on, let me go back there. Oh yeah, Mia. So at the absence, so Mia was asking how to match a specific shape factor with different asset classes. So at the absence of failure data that you can actually, you can actually draw those. Obviously, if you have failure data, you can correlate that with asset life, percent life consumed, and draw those. If that doesn't exist, I went back to I always sort of like go back to these like industry standards that I would come across in the past. Let me go back to those real quick. Yeah. So generally speaking, an asset that has less moving parts, such as civil/structural, will follow a higher shape factor. So like a concrete tank will maintain a larger percentage of its condition for a good time, for a long time. But as the asset starts to deteriorate, maybe cracks open, the rate of decay will increase at that point. Freeze-thaw cycles. Oh yeah, this side of the tank gets a little bit more sun than that side. So there's like expansion differences and so forth. But once the cracks starting to show, the rate of decay will increase. So civil structural stuff generally sits towards the top of this curve. When you have a little bit more, as you add more moving parts to it, like electrical stuff, maybe like a little below that, but as you add more moving parts, like it becomes a little flatter, like I should say, more like straighter. And then, one other thing to note is that if the failure actually is quite random for a given asset class, then you can't really then tell. Like for a concrete tank, obviously it's not random. It gotta age a lot first before it starts decaying. But instrumentation and certain electrical assets their failures pretty random, regardless of age. So those, generally I recommend like a shape factor of 1, just because you can't tell. And then you may be wondering, like I was, like when I first saw this, like many years ago, I always wondered, but like, oh, okay, what about like this, like the below one? Like, oh, that looks so weird. Like how? So that is rarely used, but it is appropriate generally for assets that, once put in service, experience a significant drop in performance, and then it kind of stabilizes. So one good example for that, I think, could be like a groundwater well you use. You develop it and it's performing great, really good specific capacity. It's flowing nicely into the well, not much, contamination or biological fouling. And then as the well ages, you lose a good chunk of that performance pretty quickly, and then it stabilizes. So that is one good example, but it's not really that, that widely used. All right, so thank you. Yeah, thank you for your question, Mia. So yeah, we cover basically rehabilitation and replacement related items here, but then if things get started, just simple separation here. Recommending, basically we go through different, strategy. We assess each strategy. Did we select preventive maintenance to be a viable strategy for this asset? If yes, let's put those considerations into the life cycle, and let's assign a shape factor for that, for like how that asset will behave over its life from a PM perspective. We do the same for corrective maintenance and predictive maintenance. But one thing that we wanted to further dig into, and that's going to be in the next iteration of this, is that we can actually start showing, like maybe even here, even though it's done under like the risk box early on, but we can actually identify what criteria we'll be using to decide what strategy is viable for what asset. So, if, at the end of the day, it could be a pretty cheap item that's run to failure, so you don't even do preventive maintenance on it. So let's write down what some of those criteria are for, deciding that groupings of strategies that may be applicable for a specific asset or asset type. So we'll add some language here around that. So obviously we'll look at risk, we'll look at cost, we'll look at health and safety impacts. So we'll try to identify basically what is worth like investing, more increasingly high resources in. And we'll show that here as a set of criteria, or at least at a minimum as an input into this process. So that covers this side of it. And then that was the maintenance side, and then we wanted to look at the operational side, and this is where energy management becomes a little bit better linked into the process, because at the end of the day, when you're operating a pump station or a treatment plant, what is it? So you labor, chemicals if you have them, and then power. So these are our big budget items. So we basically just start coming out strong from the gate, start with power usage here, and we then look at whether or not we have even sub-metered, or do we have data that we can tell us the power usage for a given asset. For some assets, that's a substantial part of their operations cost. And then if not, we can ask ourselves whether or not power usage is significant, and we can add some criteria here what this is. But this is where we start seeing some links to, I think, what you are doing on the energy side. So perhaps I don't know if you are, but we were wondering in the AM team, the energy team, are they considering some sort of criteria for maybe sub-metering, or at least some other way of monitoring energy use of certain assets? It could be like we thought maybe like a kilowatt hours, run hours combined, maybe some other criteria around like criticality perhaps. But anyway, so and then Cello mentioned the reference something called like a treasure hunt. Guessing that phrase is familiar, but perhaps looking at identifying savings, saving opportunities, and potential projects to implement to get to those saving opportunities. But there is basically some links there. But point being that we basically want to get a handle on a decent, if it's worth it, like a decent energy usage costing as a component of asset lifecycle. And then we have other considerations here. Now this is pretty generic here, and we are thinking about ways to do this right now. What we are going to do here is we are going to add a description document as to how we believe utilities may be able to deal with other operations cost. Some immediate thoughts, which have not been, yet vetted by the, whole team yet, are around looking at some of those larger operational cost components, such as labor and chemical, like outside of power we just looked at, and then perhaps finding a way to distribute those across the asset base for that given facility. For example, if you're tracking $1.5 million of labor cost over the course of a year for a given facility, because that's how many FTEs we have assigned to that facility from an operations perspective, like the maintenance cost labor can generally be tracked relatively well as the crews track their work hours against work orders that they work on that are associated with the assets. On the operations side, it's a little trickier. So you just need to do some let's call it creative math. But what is this? It's a set of assumptions. But looking at the FTEs you have available for a given facility, you can divide it one way or another. There's a few options across the asset base so that every asset gets a certain small percentage, if you will, of that $1.5 million of labor cost. There may be some exceptions. Like I've seen sometimes, some utilities contracting out their, let's say, dewatering operations to a third party. So they just deal with the whole thing, and then you write a check at the end of the month. So that actually makes things a little different, because instead of the internal labor cost, like that cost needs to come from another budget item, but like you can go get it, and then you could distribute that over those assets that are impacted, including the operation. So there's a little bit of creativity there. The question is the outcome going to be worth this effort? So we got to ask ourselves that question. I kind of believe once it's set up, it's probably not that difficult, because we can use the tools at our disposal to automate some of this stuff for us once we can set it up right. But this is the last input basically into that lifecycle cost. And then if I just scroll right, everything just like ends at the end node there. Anyway, I talked a lot. I am sorry you had to listen to me talk for so long, but in a nutshell, I wanted to quickly summarize the work that the AM team on the WISE side has done over the last, I guess it's been like 4 to 5 months now. I've sort of like lost count. But yeah, so in a nutshell, this is where we are. Going forward, I think we'll have a little bit more opportunities perhaps to coordinate around maybe some of the work you did. We could maybe do an off-page reference here and then identify any processes that or any I don't know, like approaches, whatever else it may be called, you are working on, you're developing, that we can say, oh, for energy management, there is like another process or at least a procedure or whatever it may be that the energy team developed. Perhaps we could, use as an input here, and vice versa. Anyway, so I'm going to stop now, and just wondering if anybody, if this sort of generated any immediate ideas for anybody, anything that you may want to bring up, ring any bells, all that good stuff.
I was wondering if there are questions of this, but we have a sort of a 3-part planned for today. So and this was the first 15 minutes. So the information about all the work that Mert and the Chris Wu and the others on the asset management team are working on, and the work that they're doing is available in the knowledge base. And I also just posted in the chat line a link to the spreadsheet that includes then links to playlists for each of the topics that we have in WISE. So whether it's this video, this will be going into the energy management playlist. But if you're also interested in looking at others like asset management, the playlist is there. You can go and each playlist has a number of video recordings. But to come back to this, what Mert has talked about, there is some overlap that we're going to talk about in the second part when Mike Barnett's going to do a similar trip through the model for the energy management. Any questions for Mert before we move on?
I just saw something from John that come up. How long did it take to develop the program and the workforce/team to be able to deliver this process? So John, if you're asking about the general, creation of this workflow and what led to it specifically, Cello, how long have we been working on this now? Has it been 4 months?
I think probably something like that, yes.
Yeah, now, hold on here. You work at a utility. It takes us longer than 4 months just to recruit somebody.
Oh, I'm aware of that. Yes.
I'll take this out of the recording. We don't want.
I don't think it's a surprise to anybody, Cello. The recruitment takes a while. So yeah, and John, we met. I would say on average bi-weekly to be able to push these through. And we found out that we being like the core team, if you will, mean Chris and myself, Chris from Vancouver and myself, and with some input from Cello and Scott, we found out that even if it's pretty bare, but if we put something forward to the team to sort of, pick at and improve from there, that kind of made the process move a little faster.
What I'm actually meaning is at your utility. So like, if you're not doing this level of asset management and condition assessment and tying back to, look at your pricing and your cost structure and your return on investment, et cetera, and you're trying to get there, I mean, you've got to get data, you've got to develop, there's all these things. And I'm just thinking that could take centuries, but more seriously, I'm serious, me, you've clearly done this, right? But it could well take, 4 or 5 years. It could literally take 10 years to ramp this up.
It could take longer than, it could take longer than 5. And I can reply right now, but Mia, if you wanna add something first.
Well, I definitely agree with you, John. I think this workflow process, Mert, that you presented is amazing, and I think it might be centered to the Water Bureau. I think for our utility, it will be slightly different because we went through like a reorg effort and we separated the planning and asset management and strategies into different groups. So it's a great idea to bring all those groups into like a work session and hash out a workflow that almost defines those programs, like what the inputs, what the outputs are, and how do they fit into that total life cycle cost of an asset, right? So it's a great medium for different silos to plug in. And I think on top of these workflows, you can also organize your data. So that would be like the second really, version, basically saying like, here's the workflow and here's the data that supports this workflow in these, what did they call, little rectangle decision-making points, right?
Absolutely.
So I think
Yeah.
that's amazing, and I don't think it will take us 4 months to develop that internally.
Sorry.
I think we're
Absolutely.
more on like a 5-year scale, like John said, because again, it will be like almost changing the culture in a way that the whole organization manages assets and reinvests in assets. Because right now there's a lot of work repeat that can be even optimized by just doing the workflow exercise across silos. So very interesting.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Agreed. And 4 months is just to develop the Visio. When it comes to making it a reality, I see it as, 5-year plus probably of an outlook as well. This is a higher level look at a asset life cycle, and here you'll see that it goes really to the in the very beginning, there were dinosaurs and then they died and then there's oil, and then basically CMMS selection process. And then here is, you implement it with a data structure, and here is all that data that you need to be able to do all this in the first place that Mia mentioned. And then the right work management practices, right way of collecting O&M costs. Your O&M costs may be collected great, like, pretty well in your system, but you need to still be able to analyze them. So, that's, they may be thorough, but you need to be able to analyze them. As part of this exercise, I got some help and we extracted the all the maintenance all the work orders against our pumps and motors in our CMMS, just to see like what is it that we are dealing with. And you do your filters, okay, these locations, this asset type, these activities, and so forth, and you look at it, and then I ended up with like over 8,000 rows of data over the last 10 years for all of our pumps. And then we have like, about 38 pump stations plus a few like, pumps elsewhere in the well field. But point being, like, that's the order of magnitude. And then by the time I could even use that data, half of it was gone. Half of those 8,000 records, like looked at it one by one, applied some criteria, they were not even useful. So there is like, that's what I mean saying there is a lot of data issues here before we can even jump into this. But it's nice to have a goal to get to and a steps to get there over X many years. Sorry, Mia, go ahead.
I was just imagining Brittany's face as you said non-valuable data, because she's like, yes. Anyways, I just wanted to say it's a daunting task when you look at it like, utility wide. And I think what we found the most successful approach is to find those bad actors, to find the bad apples, and implement this on a smaller scale to show the value of the effort, right? And then you have that leverage to start changing the culture and get more assets into kind of this type of a system. So for us, like, energy management is a big one because, like you said, Mert, in the beginning of your presentation, chemical, energy, those are like our biggest consumables. Labor, not so much because we are a public utility. So it's not like we can downsize the labor because all of a sudden we're saying like we have too many bodies, right? That's a harder process. But if we can find workflows to optimize our energy monitoring and real-time performance, and build that into the culture, we are in a potential of saving like tremendous amount of money, right, for our utility and therefore for the ratepayers. So this is super amazing, very aspirational vision, and it will take us 5 years to get there.
Eric Griffin has a question for you, Mert. He doesn't perform lifecycle cost analysis. He's wondering if choosing VFDs would fit into the AM lifecycle analysis, or is that more of CIP/design function?
Oh, okay. Thank you, Chella, for reminding me that. Yeah, Eric, I would say it's both. So, on the CIP design, I think when it comes to even like in the early planning stages, I think you will go through a sort of a business case, validation, business case, benefit cost analysis. So I think it would be considered there. But from on the asset management side, before even things are identified as a need to write a business case around, I think you would consider a strategy, asset replacement strategy, accounting for the variable frequency drive inclusion. That's your decision point there, whether or not, it could be like, I would think about it as a financial efficiency failure mode response almost, whether or not it makes sense to, think about the inclusion of BFDs with that. Now, you may be adding BFDs for an operational reason, so that you don't have as many start and stops, which add to the asset life at the end of the day, if you reduce your start and stops. So it may have a physical mortality component as well. But that is where I think about it from an asset management perspective. And then, of course, when you're writing a business case, you will consider that as an alternative, perhaps a replacement with or without VFDs, and its pros and cons.
We have another thing scheduled today that we were hoping would connect the work of the asset management, show where the possible. Let me just see. Of effort, data gathering, procedure, team development. Okay, sorry, I was just reading a long comment from John Norton. My takeaway here is that, John, would you mind saying this so I don't misrepresent your thoughts?
And nobody wants to hear more of Cello's voice anyway, so
yeah, yeah.
I often think that no one needs to hear more of John's voice. What I'm trying to do is think at what you're doing, Mert, and what we might have, and it's like, well, what needs to be in place? How do you set the table for this level of stuff to occur? And I see it as data, process, team, and culture. Just very simple. And I'm not trying to minimize all of the components of what you're doing. I'm just trying to think of, if we're trying to build an organization that has this, well, what do we need? Is there just Mert doing this, or is there Mert and 5 or 6 other people that he's engaging with constantly? Is it just Eric looking at energy, or are there 5 or 6 other people that are engaging it? So, there's the team, yeah.
No, this is Mia, I think, said it really nicely. It's an opportunity to break those silos, and it's just silos, it's just a cross team, cross, utility collaboration opportunity. No one team or person will be able to do this well. And it's going to take, you would need a internal charter to work off of, like specific allocation on people's schedules to pull this off. It's a transition. And then you'll have to pilot it on small scale, find the errors of our ways, and then go back to the bigger picture. So it's a left. I mean, it's a left.
So we don't have as much time left, but I wanted to address a couple of things that John has brought up, and something that I think is coming out of the discussions. I may not have the most appropriate slide, but what I could find in a hurry as I was listening to these comments, this is from our last September. We started the data and technology and data analytics team. And at the beginning, as we do with other initiatives, we asked the group, the utilities who are part of that technology team, and these are folks focused on technology. What challenges did you experience in the past when applying technology? And the highest rating was lack of collaboration between business units. After that was problems with processes. So, and then then there's lack of acceptance by staff. And so it wasn't really a problem that technology lacked functionality, but how it's configured and applied, where people and processes come in, was, you know, more of a challenge. And when we asked people how to rate the importance of the different capabilities that also John is referencing as people, processes, data, and culture. If you replace the word data with the word technology, these are exactly the components on the graph for what WISE includes. So if you look at the things that they said would be most important, and this is for technology, the number one was defining performance goals and metrics, which was really not a technology issue. And then after that, it was managing data, which is what people do. You know, they set up the taxonomy and the access to the data and so forth, collaboration across business units, and aligning use of technology with business needs. So if we look at this is the simplified, after I've been battered by criticism that my graphs are always too complicated, we have a more streamlined version here. If you look at the things that we're looking at, in the purple, we have assessment of the selected business process, which is, you know, looking at what are your business requirements. Then in the light blue, we look at, in this part, we're looking, what are we actually doing now in terms of technology and documentation? And then we have other things in yellow have to do with organization, which is organizational culture and workforce. And then we look at change management capabilities. So it is really, and when Mert said you have to start with some sort of a charter, so we are breaking down these things to address them through a methodology. I know Mike Barnett has way more than 10 minutes to talk, material to talk about, so I think it's maybe better that we do that next time than try to rush it today. Would you guys agree? I see Mike and Mike Barnett and
Hey,
Eric Griffin.
Jello,
Yes.
one thing you might want to do is in the email that I sent to you, Eric, and I think Brittany and others on the 1st of July, there's the PDF with the latest energy management models in it.
Could you bring it up instead of me looking at it?
Oh,
Because
sure.
I will stop sharing.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have to
I
go
can't
into
even
this in
type
detail.
if people are watching me, let alone find the file. You know. So John, are we addressing things that you mentioned?
From my point, yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, go ahead.
It's also my sneaky thing is I want to learn what I need to do to support Eric with his mission to get us to be energy neutral at our facility.
I think maybe more donuts, better coffee. You know, we got to keep the fuel. So anyway, Mike, go ahead.
So just as a reminder, the last time we talked, we ended up with this slightly complicated model that had two major parts. This, the results of these treasure hunts and how they're accommodated, which was discussed at length by Brittany. And then we had this part over here about ongoing energy usage projects review and management, which largely came out of the work of David Ponder and Eric Griffin. So we thought, well, these things logically fit together somehow, some way. And the result of that consolidation is what you see on this slide. So what I was going to suggest, Cello, because there's too much to talk about here in 5 minutes, but maybe you could distribute this file after the meeting, and then people can take a look. And if you concentrate on this slide number 11, I think it's page 11 in this PDF. That's the latest model, and we now have components for this block conducting the project evaluation meeting. For this block, we've got quite a few things on the measure and analyze and review current performance for existing projects. That goes into 2 or 3 levels of detail already. And as Mert pointed out, that's where, you know, there's an overlap with the kinds of the model that Mert described. So maybe take a look at this. One of the issues is, you know, is this good? And then there are also some other questions like these ideas are generated by these treasure hunts, but we really didn't identify what is a treasure hunt and what is the possible feedback to those treasure hunt processes that support or create these energy ideas events that you see over here on the left side of the screen. So there's a few things to talk about, but I think Cello, it's a good idea to delay this and talk about the details maybe in the next session.
Yeah. So I think that we're looking essentially at we're looking to integrate these things, looking at technology, the people, the workforce, and the change management, and then also look at cross connections between the different things, such as our initiative on technology and our initiative on asset management and energy, so that we can then, can I share, Mike, just one more slide?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
So that these are the pilots that have been decided, that people have decided on so far, the pilot efforts, the scope. And we have this one that emerged from the energy management team, condition assessment of pumps and motors. But it just happens that asset management team is also focused on pumps and motors. So it would be a logical connection place to look at both the energy and asset management aspects for that asset class. And like Mia made an excellent point to kind of start with something that's more modest in scope, but then we do a vertical prototype that includes all the components of the methodology to a limited number, to a limited scope of assets, maybe to a single asset class. Am I misinterpreting what you said, Mia? Mia's on mute, but hopefully I'm not angling her thoughts and words. So
no, you said it great. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I was being distracted. My girls
okay.
are up this morning.
Oh, well, that's what girls do. That, distraction is so. Let's then. This is probably a good point to break because we can address the other component of this chain next time. Eric, is there anything else you wanted to mention, or would you prefer? I'm not sure what the acoustics are in your.
It just improved, actually.
Okay.
The timing was perfect for somebody to be ripping apart my bathtub. So.
Okay.
But no, I don't. I think we can go into this with more detail next week, and maybe we can have a meeting of the small group to see if we can further the sub processes next week. To Cello, if we can try to get that scheduled.
That sounds good, and thank you for your comment, Mia, and thank you for your comment, and Peter Drucker's thing. So, and thank you, Mert, for this was very useful, very helpful. We'll be increasing this collaboration between different teams, and thank you very much. I will stop the recording now, and